Usually when you flip a circuit breaker in your house, there's this expectation of containment.
Right. It's a closed system.
Exactly. You hear a loud click, the lights go out in the kitchen or the living room, and that's just the end of it. You definitely don't expect the municipal water supply to suddenly stop running or, the price of your groceries to double the next morning.
Yeah, but that illusion of containment is incredibly dangerous when you apply it to geopolitics. I mean, we assume a localized action is going to have localized consequences.
Which is almost never the case.
No, not at all. In a hyper-connected global system, flipping a single breaker it can overload the entire grid.
Yeah.
And we are currently watching the ultimate cascading systemic shock unfold in real time.
We really are. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2026, and we are roughly 2 weeks into a massive ongoing military conflict that has completely reshaped the map of the Middle East.
And the shockwaves are already hitting, your wallet, your gas tank, and global supply chains.
Yeah, we are talking about the 2026 Iran war.
And attempting to make sense of a conflict of this magnitude while the dust is, literally still in the air is a huge challenge. The daily news cycle right now isn't just a fire hose. It's more like a centrifuge of conflicting narratives, raw panic, and frankly, intense political spin.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. So to help you cut through that overwhelming noise, we've been synthesizing a massive, deeply fractured stack of primary and secondary sources for you.
Right. We're pulling from official press releases out of the U.S. Department of War, the White House, and the IDF.
But we are also cross-referencing those official lines with real-time battlefield assessments. We've got reports from think tanks like the Hudson Institute and the Atlantic Council, alongside the constantly updating Wikipedia overview of the conflict.
And because these sources contain some highly politically charged content and just deeply conflicting international viewpoints, we need to be really transparent with you about our approach today.
Absolutely. We are entirely stepping outside the political arena for this.
Right. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the military actions, the legal justifications, or the moral viewpoints of any party involved here.
Our singular mission on this deep dive is to just strip away the spin and impartially report the actual mechanics of what these sources are telling us.
Exactly. We want to break down the timeline of the initial surprise attack, weigh the stated military objectives against some pretty glaring diplomatic contradictions.
Yeah, those are fascinating. And we'll also examine Iran's terrifyingly unconventional retaliation and look at the violent power shift happening inside Tehran right now.
So let's start with the sheer physical reality of February 28th, 2026.
Right, that date marks the initiation of a massive surprise joint military campaign.
The U.S. designated it Operation Epic Fury, while Israel operated under the banner of Operation Roaring Lion.
Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. And the sheer magnitude of the opening blows is, it's difficult for a civilian to even conceptualize.
It really is. In the first 24 hours alone, Allied forces struck over 1,000 discrete targets.
1,000 targets in a single day.
Yeah, and 10 days into the conflict, that number had escalated past 5,000.
So we are talking about the systematic dismantling of an entire nation's defense grid, command and control nodes, early warning radars, high-level leadership compounds.
Right. This opening salvo even included the assassination of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
But digging into the Hudson Institute report, the actual how of this attack tells a really fascinating story about modern warfare.
It does. It shows a very specific tactical shift.
Yeah, because the U.S. initiated the attack using these highly expensive standoff cruise missiles to blind Iran's air defenses. But once those defenses were down, they rapidly transitioned to much cheaper JDAMs, joint direct attack munitions.
And the mechanics of that shift are crucial to understanding the scale of the campaign.
Right.
A standoff weapon, like a Tomahawk cruise missile, is fired from hundreds of miles away, from a ship or a submarine out in the ocean.
So you're paying a massive financial premium for that distance.
Exactly. You pay for the distance because it keeps your pilots safely out of range of surface-to-air missiles.
But a JDAM is totally different.
Right. A JDAM isn't a missile at all. It's essentially a smart guidance tail kit strapped onto a traditional unguided gravity bomb.
So to use a JDAM, a pilot actually has to fly directly over the target and drop it.
Yeah, we call that a stand-in munition. And you can only do that once you completely own the sky.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's basically like using a high-tech remote explosive to completely blow a heavy vault door off its hinges from a mile away.
Right.
You pay a huge premium for that initial distance and safety.
Right.
But once the alarm system is completely dead, Your team can just casually walk right into the vault with standard tools to finish the job.
That sniper and crowbar analogy perfectly captures the tactical sequencing here.
Okay.
And that transition was driven by a terrifying financial reality. The burn rate for this operation was just astronomical.
I mean, the numbers in the sources are staggering.
Yeah, the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone cost the U.S. an estimated $3.7 billion.
$3.7 billion in 4 days.
Right. You simply cannot sustain that level of expenditure using $2 million cruise missiles for every single radar dish or munitions bunker.
So by blinding the integrated air defense network early, they could pivot to those cheaper gravity bombs.
Exactly, to maintain the relentless pace of the offensive without bankrupting the military budget.
And as that airspace allowed the IDF to bring in their specialized bunker-busting munitions, right?
Yep.
To strike those deep, covert nuclear facilities.
Yes. The sources list strikes on Minzadeh, Natanz, and Isfahan.
And these aren't just normal buildings on a military base.
No, not at all. These are facilities buried under literal mountains and layers of reinforced concrete.
So taking out those specific subterranean targets requires dropping massive sequential munitions into the exact same crater to dig down to the facility.
Right, and you can only achieve that kind of loitering precision when the enemy's anti-aircraft capabilities are entirely erased.
Which makes sense. But it brings up a huge question for me. If the U.S. and Israel are burning $3.7 billion in just 100 hours merely to kick the door down,
Yeah.
the prize inside has to justify that staggering cost. So what is the actual stated end game of breaking the country open like this?
Well, according to the official communications from the White House and the Department of War, the goals are intensely narrow.
Okay.
They are absolutely adamant that this is not a prelude to an endless ground-level nation-building exercise like we saw in the early 2000s.
So no boots on the ground occupation.
Right. The stated objectives are basically threefold. Permanently deny Iran the ability to construct a nuclear weapon, utterly destroy its ballistic missile manufacturing industry, and annihilate its navy.
And on that naval point, the sources note that over 50 Iranian ships have already been sent to the bottom of the ocean.
It is massive degradation.
So it's campaign designed purely for military destruction, not occupation. But, and here's where it gets really interesting to me, this is where I find a massive, almost irreconcilable contradiction in our stack of sources.
Oh, the diplomatic timeline.
Yes.
Okay.
I was looking closely at the timeline, and just one day before Operation Epic Fury launched, an Omani mediator publicly claimed a diplomatic breakthrough had been reached.
Right.
According to this mediator, Iran had finally agreed to full IAEA verification.
And for context here, the IAEA is the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Right.
And full verification doesn't just mean signing a piece of paper. It means allowing international inspectors physical, unannounced access to nuclear sites.
It's serious access.
Yeah, it means installing 24/7 cameras on centrifuges and meticulously tracking every gram of enriched uranium. It is essentially the gold standard of diplomatic containment.
So this is the pushback I have to raise. If a diplomatic deal to secure that exact physical verification was literally hours away from being signed,
Yeah.
why launch the largest U.S. military buildup in the Middle East since 2003 right at that exact moment?
It's the central question. And when you cross-reference the intelligence leaks with the official statements, two deeply conflicting narratives emerge.
Okay, let's hear them.
Well, the U.S. and Israeli officials publicly cite the doctrine of preemption. Their argument is that the diplomatic breakthrough was a deliberate mirage.
Like a stalling tactic.
Exactly. A tactic designed by Iran to buy the final few weeks they needed to assemble a functional nuclear warhead. So from this perspective, military action wasn't a choice. It was an absolute necessity to permanently remove an imminent existential threat.
Okay, so a preemptive strike to stop a ticking clock.
Right.
But what is the alternative narrative bubbling up in those leaked intelligence reports?
The alternative narrative suggests the timing wasn't dictated by Washington at all.
Really?
Yeah. Various diplomatic sources and leaked assessments imply that Israel had made the unilateral decision to strike the nuclear facilities because they viewed the diplomatic track as fundamentally flawed from the start.
Wow.
In this scenario, the U.S. administration realized the Israeli strike was inevitable.
So they were kind of forced into it.
Well, fearing that a limited Israeli strike might fail to penetrate the deepest bunkers, or that the resulting regional war would leave exposed U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria vulnerable to massive retaliation.
They felt they had to join.
Right. The U.S. felt compelled to join the operation. They had to take over the airspace to ensure the tactical success of the mission and protect their own assets.
The idea of being pulled into a multi-billion-dollar conflict by the gravitational pull of an ally's unilateral decision is pretty sobering.
It is.
And I guess it perfectly explains why the international reaction is so fiercely divided right now.
Oh, the division is profound. While Israel and the U.S. assert this campaign is a legally justified act of self-defense against an active nuclear breakout, the broader international community is totally fractured.
Yeah, the sources mention the UN.
Right. UN human rights experts and a significant bloc of nations in the global south have forcefully condemned the strikes.
What's their main argument?
They argue that without a UN Security Council mandate and without absolute, incontrovertible proof of an immediate attack, the operation is simply illegal under international law.
And we impartially report that because we even see that fractured domestically within the United States.
We do.
The polling in our sources shows a deeply split public with a massive swath of voters aggressively opposing the military action.
Yeah.
But regardless of the intense legal and moral debates happening in the UN or on cable news, the physical reality on the ground has shifted. Iran didn't just absorb these strikes.
No, they fired back.
Right. And the way they fired back fundamentally changes the geopolitical map.
Well, when an entire nation's conventional defense grid is erased, they are forced to rely on whatever offensive capabilities actually survive.
And for Iran, that meant unleashing their subterranean missile silos.
Exactly.
Our sources detail them launching massive salvos of shotgun-type cluster ballistic missiles.
Specifically the Khorramshahr.
Right, the Khorramshahr missiles, firing them at Israel, while simultaneously targeting U.S. troop concentrations in Iraq.
But they also did something highly unexpected.
Yeah, this initially baffled me. They expanded the theater of war outward, launching massive drone and missile attacks at their Gulf neighbors.
Yes.
They hit the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar.
Right.
Why attack your neighbors who aren't the ones dropping the bombs? It feels like losing a boxing match and deciding to start swinging at the spectators in the front row. Doesn't that just push those Gulf states directly into the arms of the U.S.?
Well, on a conventional military level, your boxing analogy makes perfect sense, but the Hudson Institute analysis points out that Iran isn't fighting a conventional war anymore.
Okay, what kind of war are they fighting?
This is a strategy of desperate, asymmetrical pressure. Iran knows they cannot defeat the U.S. Air Force or the IDF in a head-to-head fight.
Right, the power imbalance is too massive.
Exactly. So they have to leverage vulnerabilities elsewhere to force the international community to demand a ceasefire. And they aren't just attacking oil refineries to spike global prices.
No, they are using a far more terrifying weapon.
Yes.
The water weapon.
Exactly. Iranian drones have deliberately and systematically struck desalination plants along the Gulf Coast.
This detail from the sources completely recontextualizes the entire conflict for me.
It's the real aha moment of the Hudson Report.
Let's explain the mechanics of this because it exposes a shocking fragility. The Gulf is one of the most hyper-arid regions on the planet.
Right.
According to the intelligence assessments we reviewed, 90% of Kuwait's drinking water and 86% of Oman's drinking water doesn't come from lakes or aquifers.
No.
It comes from industrial desalination.
And desalination is a massive, highly complex industrial process. You are pulling in millions of gallons of seawater, pushing it through these massive reverse osmosis membranes at incredibly high pressures, and then pumping it into a municipal grid.
You can't exactly hide that in a bunker.
No, you cannot hide a desalination plant inside a hollowed-out mountain like a nuclear centrifuge. It has to sit directly on the coastline.
Right.
It requires massive intakes, sprawling piping, and enormous power grids. They are the ultimate soft targets.
So by sending a swarm of cheap, explosive drones to shatter those exposed reverse osmosis membranes, Iran isn't just hitting a strategic asset.
No, they're instantly threatening the hydrostrategic lifeline of millions of civilians.
You can survive a few weeks without imported oil.
Yeah.
A city in the desert cannot survive 3 days without drinking water.
Exactly. They are holding the actual biological survival of neighboring populations hostage.
Which forces a brutal calculus onto the United States and its allies.
It really does. If millions of people in allied Gulf nations suddenly face death by dehydration, the U.S. military has to divert massive logistical resources away from the war effort and toward emergency humanitarian water lifts.
Wow.
It's an asymmetrical attempt to make the geopolitical cost of continuing the war simply too high to bear.
But while Iran projects this terrifying asymmetric threat outward across the Gulf, We also have to look at the violent implosion happening internally.
Yes.
Because the massive pressure cooker of these airstrikes is forcing a rapid, brutal transformation of the Iranian state itself.
The domestic fallout is just apocalyptic right now.
The sources paint a very grim picture of life inside Tehran. There's widespread civilian panic.
Oh, yeah.
The sky is literally raining toxic black ash from the burning oil depots that were struck in the opening days.
And the regime has instituted a near-total internet blackout. Civilian connectivity has dropped to just 4% of normal levels.
4%.
Yeah, they are plunging the population into the dark to control the flow of information.
Because managing a population of 88 million people while the country's infrastructure burns is a crisis of continuity.
It absolutely is.
Which brings me to a massive assumption that seems to have backfired.
What's that?
Well, the stated hope from some U.S. officials, communicated openly to the press before the strikes, was that applying this level of crushing military pressure would empower the Iranian people to overthrow their government.
Right.
The thought was that a decapitation strike against the supreme leader was supposed to be the catalyst. But based on our sources, is that actually happening?
The Atlantic Council's analysis suggests the exact opposite is occurring.
Really?
Yeah. The assassination of Ali Khamenei didn't result in a democratic uprising or a collapse into fractured warlords.
What happened instead?
Instead, his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was hastily elevated to supreme leader. And Mojtaba's power base is entirely different from his father's.
How so?
He has spent decades as a shadowy backroom operator, deeply intertwined with the intelligence apparatus and the military wings of the state.
So his ascension effectively merges the religious authority directly with the military complex.
Yes, and the Atlantic Council has coined a terrifying term for this rapid evolution.
Oh, IRGC.
Exactly. They warn that the intense stress of this war is accelerating the creation of IRGC.
Could you break down what the IRGC actually is for us? Because it's not just the regular Iranian army.
Right. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, is fundamentally an ideological paramilitary force. But over the last few decades, they haven't just controlled missiles.
Right.
They've taken over massive sectors of the Iranian economy, from construction to telecommunications.
They're everywhere.
Yeah. So what IRGC means is a scenario where the IRGC completely drops any remaining flimsy facade of a civilian government. No more pretending with a president or a parliament.
Wow.
The external pressure is allowing them to legally and visibly consolidate absolute power, forging a pure, hardline military dictatorship.
It's the classic rally around the flag effect, just weaponized.
Exactly.
When your civilian infrastructure is collapsing and foreign bombers are in your airspace, the instinct for national survival often overrides domestic grievances against the regime, at least in the short term.
Right. The fire isn't melting the regime, it's forging it into something much harder and infinitely more militarized.
Well, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today.
We really have.
From the billion-dollar mechanics of blinding air defenses with cruise missiles, to the opaque diplomatic timing of the strikes, to the weaponization of drinking water and the birth of a military junta.
That's a lot to process.
It is. But I want to pull this massive global lens directly back to you listening right now.
Yeah.
Why does a war being fought thousands of miles away over subterranean bunkers and desert coastlines matter to you sitting at home?
Because, as we said at the start, the global system is not a series of isolated circuit breakers.
Exactly. The immediate, tangible economic shockwaves are already hitting. And it starts at the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
The Strait of Hormuz is a remarkably narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. And through that tiny choke point flows roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption.
Which is massive on its own.
But crucially, it's also the primary artery for vital chemical fertilizers that the entire global agricultural sector relies upon.
Right.
And right now, massive commercial shipping through that strait has essentially ground to a halt.
Because the physical mechanics of modern shipping dictate that you cannot send a massive, slow-moving commercial tanker through a waterway where cheap explosive drones are actively hunting.
It's just too dangerous.
Yeah. And even if a tanker wanted to risk it, the global maritime insurance market has panicked.
Of course.
Premiums for war risk coverage have skyrocketed to the point of unprofitability, or coverage has simply been dropped entirely. And if you can't insure the cargo, the ships don't sail.
And as a direct result of that bottleneck, global oil prices have violently spiked to over $114 a barrel.
Yeah.
And that isn't just a number on a ticker tape.
Mm-hmm.
That is the cost of moving everything. It makes your commute more expensive, yes, but it fundamentally drives up the cost of manufacturing every single plastic good, the cost of shipping groceries to your local supermarket, and it threatens global food security by fracturing the fertilizer supply chain.
Lower crop yields mean drastically higher food prices.
Exactly. This war is acting as a massive, uncontrollable engine for global inflation.
Which leaves us with a critical, unsettling realization about the architecture of modern civilization.
What's that final thought for us to mull over?
Well, throughout this deep dive, we've seen how entirely reliant we are on highly centralized, incredibly efficient, but fatally exposed lifelines.
Yeah.
We saw it with the massive desalination plants sitting undefended on the Gulf Coast, and we see it with the narrow shipping lanes of Hormuz.
We optimize everything for economic efficiency, but we sacrifice resilience.
We do. And if a swarm of relatively cheap $50,000 drones can instantly threaten the drinking water and energy supply of entire nations, consider what other invisible lifelines are just as exposed.
Like what?
Think about the global internet and the international financial system. 99% of all global data traffic doesn't travel through satellites. It travels through a few dozen physical undersea fiber optic cables resting on the ocean floor.
Oh, wow.
So if asymmetric warfare has evolved to target the most fragile physical links of an adversary's society, what happens when a localized conflict decides to sever the physical cables that hold the modern digital economy together? How truly secure is any country's critical infrastructure in the age of asymmetrical warfare?
It really forces us to ask that question. We like to think our systems are insulated, but the grid is all connected, and right now the entire system is bracing for the surge.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.